She dropped the bomb between her second bite of ribeye and a sip of red wine. Merlot, I think. She never drank Merlot. I filed yesterday, she said, almost absent-mindedly, like she was commenting on the weather or asking for more butter. I didn't answer right away. I stared at her mouth as it chewed, slow, rhythmic, like nothing had changed. Like she didn't just swing a wrecking ball through 14 years of shared existence. The steak on my plate sizzled mockingly, reminding me that the world doesn't pause for heartbreak. Across the dining room, a couple laughed. Silverware clinked. Somewhere behind us, someone spilled water and cursed under their breath. I blinked. You filed? She nodded once. Perfectly calm. Perfectly polished. She even dabbed the corner of her lip with a cloth napkin, the way her mother used to do at fundraisers. For divorce, yeah, she said. It's done. I just thought you should know before tomorrow. I wanted to ask what happens tomorrow, but my mouth was too dry to form words. The waiter arrived just then. Poor guy. He was smiling, probably rehearsing the daily dessert specials. And there we were, me sitting there like I'd just been hit by a bus, and her sipping wine like she was watching the previews before a movie. She smiled at him. No dessert, thank you. Just the check. The waiter gave me a puzzled look, probably sensing something was off. But he didn't ask questions, just nodded and vanished like a ghost. I still hadn't taken a bite. Then she added, it's best we don't talk about it in public. Tomorrow's the will reading. Dad would have hated a scene. Right. The will. Her father, Grant Weldon, had died 4 days ago. Cardiac arrest, they said. Slumped over his grand piano in that cold, echoing mansion like a fallen statue. No warning. No illness. No time for closure. And now she was a widow's daughter, $250 million richer, and apparently single again. The thing is, I should have seen it coming. There were signs. Little ones. She started locking her phone. Her texts turned into one-word replies. She stopped asking me how my day was. At night, she turned away from me in bed, always claiming she was just tired. But this? Filing for divorce the day before the reading of a fortune? Something about the timing made my stomach twist. And yet, she looked relaxed, almost relieved, like she'd crossed something off a to-do list. And for some reason, that was the part that broke me. Not the money, not the betrayal, but the ease. We didn't speak in the car. She drove, of course she did. It was her father's old Mercedes, and I was never comfortable enough behind the wheel, according to her. The engine purred like it didn't care it was escorting the death of a marriage. Outside, the streetlights blurred through the tinted glass like smeared gold, and inside, the silence felt like a scream no one dared acknowledge. I glanced at her hands on the wheel. Steady, manicured, cold. The same hands that used to trace circles on my back when I couldn't sleep. The same fingers that once trembled when she said she wanted to grow old with me. Now, they looked like they belonged to a stranger. As we pulled into the driveway, I half expected her to say something. Anything. A crumb of explanation, maybe even an apology. But she just turned off the ignition, unbuckled her seatbelt, and opened the door in one graceful motion. Like she was getting out of a taxi, not ending a life we built together brick by brittle brick. I stayed in the passenger seat a moment longer. I didn't want to follow her. I didn't want to go inside and pretend the house was still ours. But the night air was cooling fast, and the motion sensor porch light flickered on like an impatient usher. So I stepped out, shoulders heavy, shoes scraping gravel louder than they should have. The house was spotless. Of course it was. She had it professionally cleaned before the funeral. She even replaced the curtains. Too much beige, she'd said. I wanted to feel like a fresh start. I thought she meant for grieving. Now I see she meant for leaving. I watched her kick off her heels, hang up her coat, and walk straight to the kitchen. The fridge opened. Glass clinked. A bottle of champagne? No. It was wine again. Another bottle of that same Merlot she never used to drink. She poured one glass. Just one. You're not having any? She asked, like she hadn't just detonated our life at dinner. I think I'll pass, I said, my voice barely audible. She shrugged and walked out of the room without another word, her wine in hand, vanishing into the shadows of the hallway like a ghost that still paid property tax. I stood there, surrounded by marble countertops, curated cookbooks, and the scent of lemon floor polish. And for the first time in over a decade, I realized I had no idea where she was going. Not just that night, but in general. Not emotionally, not spiritually, not legally. Just a lost her. And then I saw the envelope. It was on the counter, cream-colored, thick, my name written on it in pen, her handwriting. I opened it with trembling fingers, expecting it to be a note. Maybe something poetic and cruel, like, "You'll understand someday." But it wasn't a note. It was a printed list. Typed. Numbered. To do before will reading. Call divorce attorney. Transfer stocks. Cancel joint accounts. Final hair appointment. Pickup dress. Tell Jeremy. Tell Jeremy. That's me. She'd planned this like a wedding. Like a business merger. Like a military strike. My name wasn't even at the top of the list. And there, at the bottom, in bold font. Remember, smile. It's already yours. I stared at that line until it blurred. My heart felt like it was chewing itself apart. And in that moment, I knew something was wrong. More than just the divorce. More than just betrayal. She wasn't just leaving. She was winning. And I had no idea what game she was playing. The next morning, I didn't speak to her. Not out of protest or pride. Just paralysis. I woke up on the downstairs couch with a stiff neck and the sour taste of dreams I couldn't remember. Upstairs, I could hear her heels click against the hardwood as she moved from room to room. She was humming something. Cheerfully. Off-key. It was a melody I hadn't heard in years. One she used to sing when we first moved in, back when the house felt too big, and we used to joke about getting lost on the way to the bathroom. Now, I would have preferred getting lost. She came downstairs dressed in black, sleek, tailored, deliberate. Her lips were blood red. Her hair was pulled so tight it made her cheekbones look sharper. She didn't say good morning. She didn't ask how I slept. She just handed me a blazer and said, "Try not to look like you've been crying." I hadn't, but I was close. The car ride was silent again. The wind outside hissed through the tiny crack in the back window I always meant to fix but never did. She never liked that sound. But now, she didn't seem to notice. Or maybe she just didn't care. We pulled into the lot of her father's law firm, a massive gray building with mirrored glass and no soul. The kind of place where people don't make eye contact in the elevators. Where secrets are currency and sympathy is a liability. As we walked in, a man in a three-piece suit was already waiting in the marble lobby. He looked like he hadn't aged in 20 years, silver hair, posture like a board, eyes like a hawk that charges by the hour. "Mr. Vexley," she said with a smile. "This is Jeremy." "I know," he said, looking directly at me. His voice was smooth, but cold. The kind of voice you could imagine delivering a eulogy with perfect pronunciation and zero emotion. He extended a hand. I shook it. It was dry, firm, unapologetically brief. "This way," he said, turning sharply and leading us down a long corridor. The room they brought us to had no windows. Just bookshelves, a long polished table, and 3 chairs. One for him, one for her, and, I realized as I entered, one for me. She didn't ask me to sit. She just did. He opened a thick black folder and pulled out a small voice recorder. "As you know," he said, glancing at her but not at me, "your father left behind a revised will, notarized and time-stamped approximately 6 weeks prior to his passing. As per his instructions, it is to be read aloud in full and recorded." She nodded, calm. She even leaned back slightly, like she was settling into a show she'd already seen and was just waiting for her favorite part. I, meanwhile, was sweating through my shirt. Mr. Vexley pressed play. Her father's voice crackled through the room, a deep, weary rasp. He sounded older than I remembered. Tired. Like even in death, he was carrying something heavy. "If you're hearing this," the voice said, "then I've already done what I never thought I'd do. Die before tying up all my loose ends." Marlene smiled faintly. "I'll make this brief. To my daughter, Marlene Weldon, I leave." She leaned forward. Nothing. The silence that followed felt like someone had vacuumed all the oxygen from the room. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. She didn't blink. Not out of malice, her father's voice continued, but out of knowledge. "Marlene, you've made your choices. You've distanced yourself from everything I value. Truth, trust, humility. You've hurt the people who love you, and you've done it in the shadows." I turned to her. Her face was pale. Her hand was gripping the arm of the chair so hard. Her knuckles were white. "This may come as a shock, but I've seen everything. The transfers, the private meetings, the insurance policy switch, even the private investigator you hired last summer, which, by the way, was a spectacular failure." I felt something cold crawl up my spine. "Which is why," the voice continued, "I've left everything, Every cent, every share, every property. Not to you, but to the one person who's been in this family for the right reasons. The room was spinning. Jeremy. It felt like time froze. My name echoed off the walls like it didn't belong to me, like it had been pulled from a different reality and dropped here as some kind of cosmic error. I looked at her. She looked at me. Her expression wasn't shock. It was hatred. I didn't hear the rest of the recording. Not really. There were more words, legal phrases, conditions, trusts, executors, real estate parcels, international holdings, but they swirled together like water circling a drain. My ears rang. My body felt light, almost detached, like I was watching myself from across the room, sitting in a chair that now, technically, belonged to me. Mr. Vexley paused the recording after it ended and slid a thin stack of papers across the table. These outline the full transfer of assets. I'll need your signature on the last page, Jeremy. He said it like we were finalizing a credit card application. I looked down at the folder and then back up at Marlene. She was perfectly still. Too still. The calm wasn't natural, it was constructed, like a stage prop. Her back was straight. Her breathing was shallow. Her eyes, locked on the middle of the table, didn't blink. But her hand, I noticed, was still gripping the edge of her chair, and her nails had dug little crescent-shaped marks into the leather. I braced myself for the explosion. I expected her to scream, flip the table, accuse someone of forging the will, threaten lawsuits, or murder. But she didn't. She stood, smoothed her dress, turned to me, and smiled. Not the kind of smile that says, "You got lucky." The kind that says, "Checkmate, and you don't even know it yet." "Well," she said, her voice syrupy and slow. "Congratulations, darling." She walked around the table and kissed me on the cheek. Cold, precise, humiliating. "Looks like you win." I flinched, confused, nauseous. Mr. Vexley handed me a pen. My hand was shaking as I signed. By the time I looked up again, she was gone. No questions. No goodbye. Just the click of heels vanishing into the corridor and the soft suction sound of the office door closing behind her. Mr. Vexley adjusted his cuffs and gave me a look, part approval, part pity. "It's all yours now," he said. "Though I suspect the next few days may be uncomfortable." Uncomfortable? Try unlivable. I left that office a millionaire. Maybe even a billionaire, depending on how the offshore accounts were structured. But I didn't feel rich. I felt like I was walking around in someone else's skin. Nothing about it felt like a victory. Nothing about it felt real. That night, I didn't go home. I checked into a hotel, paid in cash, sat on the bed fully clothed, and stared at the wall for 2 hours straight. My phone buzzed 13 times. All from her. No texts. Just missed calls. I didn't pick up. At midnight, someone knocked on the door. My heart stopped. I didn't move. A second knock. Slower. Heavier. I walked to the peephole and looked. It was her. Marlene. Standing there barefoot, hair damp, wearing a long black coat over what looked like nothing. Her eyes were wide, glassy. She didn't look angry. She looked hungry. I didn't open the door. I waited. After a few seconds, she leaned in close and whispered, "You think this is over?" Then she pulled something out of her coat pocket and slid it under the door. An envelope. I stared at it for a long time before picking it up. Inside was a single photograph. Of me. Sleeping. In our bed. Taken sometime last week. On the back, written in sharp red ink, "You should have stayed small." I didn't sleep that night. I tried. I laid in the hotel bed with the lights off, sheets pulled to my chest like some useless armor, but my body wouldn't let go. Every sound outside the window, the rattle of an elevator, a hallway footstep, a distant car door, sent lightning down my spine. I kept looking at the photo, over and over, not because I didn't believe it was real, but because I did. The grainy texture, the angle, the timing. It wasn't some old memory. It wasn't doctored. It was recent. My face was slack with sleep, mouth slightly open, the shadow of a blanket barely covering my shoulder. It was taken from just a few feet away, maybe from the closet, maybe the hallway. The only question was when, because I had no memory of her being in the room. And the idea that she'd been standing there, hovering above me, quietly snapping a picture while I dreamed about getting out of this marriage, it made my skin crawl. And the handwriting on the back? That wasn't her usual script. It was rushed, jagged, almost unhinged, like someone trying to mimic calmness through clenched teeth. I waited until sunrise before packing my things. I didn't check out at the front desk. I just left the key on the pillow, grabbed the photo, and walked. I didn't know where I was going, but I couldn't stay still. Not now. That's when the second photo showed up. It was waiting for me in the glove compartment of my car. I hadn't touched it in 2 days. I'd taken an Uber to the law office and left the car parked behind the hotel. When I opened the door and sat down, I reached for my sunglasses and instead found a thin envelope, identical to the one from last night. No return address. No markings. Just my name. Again. Inside. Another photo. This time it was her. Marlene. She was sitting at a cafe, wearing sunglasses, smiling at someone across the table. A man. Younger. Handsome. Smiling back. Their hands were just barely touching. On the back, in the same blood-red ink. This started long before the funeral. I felt like the wind had been knocked out of me. I tried to convince myself it was a coincidence, a doctored photo, an ex from years ago, anything. But the timestamp on the corner read last month. The day after I had flown to Chicago for a client pitch. I remember because she had been oddly supportive. Go get that contract, she said, smiling. She even packed my luggage. Now I wondered what else she packed while I was gone. I stared at the cafe in the background. It looked familiar. Downtown. Near the park. I didn't even think. I just drove. It was still there. Same metal chairs. Same green awning. Same little chalkboard sign with the day's specials. I walked up to the counter and showed the barista the photo. Was she here last week? I asked. The barista glanced at it, then at me. You mean Marlene? The blood drained from my face. You know her? She nodded. Yeah, she's been coming in every Tuesday. Sometimes with a guy, sometimes alone. Orders the same thing. Earl Grey, oat milk, no sugar. I hadn't known she liked Earl Grey. She told me tea made her feel swollen. The barista looked at me, then leaned in. Are you her husband? I hesitated. I was. The barista frowned. That's weird. I thought her husband was. She stopped herself. Never mind. No. Say it. She looked around and dropped her voice. Well, I just thought her husband was taller. That guy she always comes in with. She always says he's her husband. Sorry, I didn't mean anything by it. I stepped outside, lungs burning. The air suddenly felt heavier. Thicker. There wasn't just an affair. There was a replacement. And then my phone buzzed again. Blocked number. One message. Don't get clever, Jeremy. We practiced this for months. You were just the stand-in. I don't remember how I got home. I must have driven, because my car ended up in the driveway. But the actual trip? Blank. My hands were on the wheel, my eyes on the road. But my mind was ricocheting between memories, not random ones, but all the wrong ones. Every time she smiled at me from across a dinner table. Every time she told me, you're the only one I trust. Every business trip she encouraged me to take. Every night she claimed she was working late. All of it was unraveling and fast forward, like someone had hit rewind and pulled the truth out from under the narration. The house was dark when I entered. I stood in the doorway for a long time before I stepped inside. The air smelled faintly of lavender and bleach, too clean, too sterile. It was like the house had been wiped of something, or someone. I walked through the rooms, expecting her to jump out, shout, cry, beg, but it was empty, silent. I should have left. Every instinct told me not to stay, but I went upstairs anyway, drawn by some idiotic impulse to look for more clues, more answers, more something. I started in the bedroom. It looked mostly the same, but the jewelry box on her side of the dresser was gone. The nightstand drawer? Empty. Even the charger cable she always stole from my side of the bed had vanished. Like she took time to erase herself. Like this had been planned for months, and I'd just been too busy pretending to be happy to notice the disappearing pieces. Then I opened her closet. There, on the top shelf, shoved behind a stack of decorative pillows, was a box I didn't recognize. I pulled it down slowly, afraid it would explode in my hands. Inside, photos. Stacks of them. Hundreds. Not of us. Not of her and I. Of him. The man from the cafe. In different outfits, at different times of day, in different cities. Some of them were surveillance style, grainy, taken from a distance. But some were up close. Intimate. His face lit by candlelight. His hand brushing her cheek. One was taken in our kitchen. He was drinking coffee. Wearing my robe. And then there were documents. A fake lease agreement under my name, but with his picture on the ID. Flight confirmations from cities I've never been to. Receipts for hotel stays on my business trips. In her name, registered with 2 guests. I wasn't just being cheated on. I was being duplicated. They were using me. And I didn't know for what yet, but the pit in my stomach told me it was bad. Worse than betrayal. Worse than divorce. Something orchestrated. Then I saw the note. It was at the bottom of the box, scrawled on hotel stationery. If he ever finds this, skip to phase 3. No signature. No details. Just that. I sat on the edge of the bed, the box open beside me, my pulse thudding like a war drum. I didn't know what phase 3 was, but the fact that it had a label was enough to send me spiraling. Then my phone rang. Unknown number again. I let it go to voicemail. The message came through almost instantly, voice distorted, probably digital. Jeremy, you weren't the prize. You were the passcode. Congratulations. You just opened the last door. I didn't even know what that meant. But as I looked back at the photos, I noticed something I hadn't before. In every single one of them, the man, her man, was wearing a watch. The same one. Gold face. Black band. Small chip on the top right corner of the glass. I'd seen that watch before. Not in real life. In a photo. A framed photo. One that used to sit in her father's study. The man in that picture wasn't a boyfriend. He was her father's former business partner. The one who vanished 4 years ago. Presumed dead in a boating accident. For hours, I sat frozen on the edge of the bed, staring at that chipped watch in photo after photo. I wanted it to be a coincidence, a replica, a generic design, something mass-produced and meaningless. But I knew better. I had seen that exact watch in person, once. It was during a fundraiser at her father's estate, years ago. I had wandered into the wrong wing looking for a bathroom, and found myself in a room lined with photographs and newspaper clippings. A tribute, I assumed. The wall was dedicated to Grant Weldon's legacy, awards, partnerships, contracts, and one photo dead center, slightly larger than the rest. 2 men shaking hands. One was her father. The other, a younger man with sandy hair, a sly grin, and that gold-faced watch gleaming under the camera flash. Underneath was a brass plate. Thomas Lyll, co-founder, Halberd and Lyell Asset Group. Presumed drowned. No body recovered. And now he was in Marlene's cafe photos, holding her hand. I pulled the photo closer. Same jawline. Same eyes. Alive. That's when it hit me. I hadn't just married someone who betrayed me. I'd married into a cover operation. A decades-old con, hidden beneath tuxedos, boardrooms, and estate champagne. But why me? Why now? I scoured every photo, every document in the box again, looking for patterns, and that's when I found it. A small USB tucked between the cardboard layers in the bottom corner. It wasn't labeled, just matte black and warm, like it had been handled recently. I slid it into my laptop, half expecting it to fry the hard drive or trigger some kind of remote wipe. But instead, it opened a single folder. Inside, one file. Halberd_access_recovery_plan. PDF. My hands were shaking as I opened it. It wasn't a will. It was a blueprint. I scrolled through 25 pages of detailed notes, dates, bank routing numbers, corporate signatures. Pages marked with terms like surrogate holder, temporary beneficiary shell, and asset transfer by marriage proxy. And then I saw my name. Jeremy Cole, secondary profile, eligible, trustworthy, emotionally compliant, public record, clean, psychological risk, low. There was even a profile image of me, my old DMV photo. I wasn't a husband. I was selected. Used to move funds. Used to hold assets that were never mine. Used as a legal smokescreen until the real players resurfaced. I was a pawn. A legally binding, tax-sheltered, emotionally groomed pawn. Suddenly, every dinner, every compliment, every slow dance under the string lights in Napa felt like a script I hadn't realized I was reading from. And now? Now that I'd inherited everything, the plan had moved to phase 3, and I was holding it. All of it. I didn't hear the door until it closed. Not knocked. Closed. I turned around slowly. She was standing at the top of the stairs. No makeup. No heels. Barefoot. Her face unreadable. I told you, she said calmly, her voice like glass on marble. You should have stayed small. I reached for my phone. No one's coming, Jeremy, she said, stepping down the stairs one deliberate step at a time. You were never in danger. You were the vault. But then you had to start asking questions. She moved like a shadow. Confident. Controlled. Do you know how many men would have just taken the money, bought a yacht, and disappeared? She whispered. You had the easiest role of all. All you had to do was exist. My mouth was dry. I tried to form a sentence, a threat, a demand, anything. But she was in front of me now, face inches from mine. And then she smiled. Soft, almost sad, and said, "But now? Now we have to change the plan." She pressed something cold into my hand. A key, small, brass, engraved with a number, 6110. "I hope you're braver than you've been pretending to be," she whispered. "Because what's in that locker doesn't belong to either of us." And then, just like that, she walked out, left the house, left me holding a key that felt heavier than every lie I'd swallowed since the day I said I do. I didn't sleep. Again, I sat at the kitchen table until dawn, the brass key resting in front of me like a loaded weapon. My coffee went cold. The silence in the house shifted. It wasn't oppressive anymore. It was clean, honest. Like I could finally hear my own thoughts without her voice layered over them. Locker 6110. It sounded like nothing. A number. A box in a wall. But I knew it wasn't. Not if she'd handed it to me like that. Not after everything. Whatever was inside, it wasn't part of the trap. It was part of the release. By mid-morning, I drove to the address she'd scribbled on the envelope beneath the key. It was a storage facility on the edge of town, the kind of place people forgot existed unless they had something to hide. The attendant didn't ask questions. He scanned the key, nodded toward a concrete hallway, and buzzed open a door. Locker 6110 was at the far end. I hesitated for a second, heart pounding, hands sweating around the key. Then I slid it into the lock. The door clicked and opened. Inside was a single briefcase. Nothing else. I carried it to the small folding table in the hallway, heart thudding. It had a combination lock, but the numbers were already set. I pushed the latch. It opened with a hiss. Inside, there were three things. First, a manila envelope marked, "For Jeremy, when you're ready." Second, a leather-bound notebook filled with handwritten pages, Marlene's handwriting. And third, a check, made out to me, for $10 million. Signed, cleared, ready. I sat down. The floor felt more stable than the chair. I opened the envelope. Inside was a letter. "Jeremy, you were never meant to get hurt. You were the only honest man I've ever known. And that's why you were the only one I couldn't fake it with. You weren't just the cover. You were the conscience. And I needed that, even if I couldn't be what you deserved." The notebook explains everything. The why, the who, the when. If you read it, you'll understand the storm I was born into. You'll understand what I was trying to escape, what I was trying to destroy. But if you don't want to read it, I won't blame you. You've earned your exit. Clean, unchased, untouched. The check is yours, untied to the will, untied to me. Call it a refund for the years I stole. And if you ever find peace, real peace, I hope you remember that somewhere in the wreckage, I loved you the only way I knew how. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I just sat there for a long time, letting the weight of everything settle in like dust finally falling after an explosion. I did read the notebook. Eventually. Not that day. Not that week. But I did. And it didn't excuse what she'd done, but it made sense. It filled in the cracks. Showed me the machinery behind the woman I thought I'd married. And in a strange way, it freed me. It's been 7 months now. I moved across the country. Small town. Quiet streets. I bought a little bookstore on Main Street and renamed it The Vault. No one here knows who I used to be. No one asks. I donated most of the money. Kept enough to live. Enough to rebuild. Sometimes, I still hear from Vexley. Apparently, the assets are frozen in legal limbo now. Doesn't matter. I don't want them. And sometimes, when the wind picks up and the old bell above the bookstore door rattles, I remember those damn wind chimes. And I smile. Because for the first time in my life, I know they're ringing for me.